Well, good afternoon, everybody. I'm back again. This is actually the third attempt at this video. The others were getting quite long and a little bit convoluted, so I'm going to try and pull it back a little bit today on this one. Hopefully, we'll knock it out in within the 30 minutes. That's what I'm hoping. Anyway, with that said, I'll tell you what we're going to take a look at. We're looking at the details column of the second N.Z.E.F Freedom's Call role. And but just before we do that, I do want to take a quick look over some of the incidental roles, the ancillary roles, just plugging in a few gaps that we may not have covered before. We'll then go on to the other forces, we'll then go on to the details column of the second N.Z.E.F role, which is, I think, column AF, if my memory serves me right. That will mean that come the next video, I will be able to, with the exception of the familial role, which I want to hold off on until then, that will be the last of the roles that we take a look at. So those two roles only will be the focus of our next video chat. Because I think there's just so much to be said about the other forces role and the familiar role that they warrant a separate session in themselves. So that said, we're going to move across now and just look at some of these ancillary roles before we visit the details column of the second N.Z.E.F role. Starting with the first one, the lest we forget role. Remember, this role only shows up members of the second N.Z.E.F. So you won't see members of the Air Force or Navy, anyone who served with the Air Force or Navy on this role if they did not return from overseas, but they do feature on the other forces role, and that fact is duly notated. So in all we have a total of a good few hundred, I think here. What are we looking at? Probably close to 600 anyway entries. There are no duplicates on this role. They're just as the name is just as it appears on the nominal role. There are aliases, but there are no duplicates. In other words, no duplicate entries. We have a regimental number and date of death and age. The latter two columns are highlighted in yellow. So I think that's really all I need to say about the lest we forget role. I don't think I need to dwell on that further. As I say, quite heavily represented with Maori, which is really very, very sad to see. And if you look closely, you'll see too that sometimes there are a number of family members, brothers, perhaps sons, that just never came back home. Okay, with that said, we're going to go on to the next one. The nurses' roles. They're actually 1, 2, 3 roles here, separated by they're a row apart. They just trickle down one single spreadsheet. They have, again, the little codes up at the top, what have you, but the first of these roles show these women who do not appear on the New Zealand military nurses website at all. So they were members of either the N.Z.E.F or the WAAC, but they do not appear on the N.Z.E.F or the WAAC roles. Now there is a possibility that some of these women, and I will need to return to this, actually served with the WAAC overseas. But on the face of the information that I had, that was not the case. But I may need to return to some of these just to double check on that as well. So they don't appear on those roles that feature on the New Zealand Military Nurses website. The second block shows those that serve with the N.Z.E.F, and the third block with the WAAC, W-A-A-C. As I say, one of the problems that we have with notations, particularly on gravestones, is that WAAC entries, we see a WAAC entry, WAAC on the gravestone, and it's not immediately clear as to whether that service was here in New Zealand or with the New Zealand forces overseas, or indeed perhaps with the British forces, because they had their own Women's Auxiliary Army Corps as well. There are duplicates here. duplicate entries because many of these women married. Sometimes they married servicemen as well. So that's what we're really looking at here. You have an alias column as well, but other than that, it follows much the same line as the big roll, what we call the second N.Z.E.F roll, and I think you'll find it otherwise all pretty straightforward. So with that said about the nurses roll, just looking to the future, obviously if I find any other women that should be on here, they will go on here, or if in fact there are one or two in that very first block that shouldn't be here, then they may end up being removed. But for the moment they all appear to have served with the either the NZANS or the NZWAAC. The next role that I'm going to take, or it's actually really a listing I'm going to take a quick look at, is the prisoner of war listing. Now the only comment I would make about column B, which has the, column A, which has the name, the surname of the person taken prisoner, is that sometimes you will see military awards alongside of that name. I'm looking at one now, Kelvin Lloyd Brown, who was awarded the DSO and MC. What we don't know is whether that particular chap had received that award prior to being taken prisoner or after. So just because you see DSO MC against the surname does not mean to say that he held those gallantry awards at the time of being taken prisoner. One or two, we don't know just what their ranking was at the time they were taken captive, so I've left those blank. They may possibly have been the same rank that they were when they embarked, but they may well have been either promoted or demoted, so I've left those ones blank, but most have a rank alongside of them. We have the service number, of course, and we have the place where they were taken captive. And that was normally Greece, Crete, North Africa, Italy, Germany. Those were probably the main spheres. If we have the notation unknown there, some of those will have an asterisk against them. And what that simply means is that there is a slim possibility that that person, even though there was an indication, say, in maybe something like the Dominion Post, and this would have been accessed via papers past, that this particular person was taken prisoner, only that we would find out later on, or perhaps never find out, whether in fact that information was correct and that they returned to safety. So there may be the odd person here that with the passage of time will be removed from this role, but for the moment we will assume that they were taken prisoner of war. Most of them, it's fairly clear that they were taken prisoner of war, because we have either a prisoner of war tag, serial number, or we have some mention of the camp in which they were held, or camps. Sometimes there were work camps as well in which they were held. There's also a website up about Starling 1818, which provided quite a lot of information. As I say, most of the information here that you see here came from either the cenotaph rolls, the cenotaph roll itself, or from the list of second N.Z.E.F prisoners of war, which was compiled by Mr. Ralph Baker, and that's an excellent, really is an excellent resource. So we have the various camps where they were held. A few of them we have a notation whether they were killed or died while they were a POW, and you will see when you go back to the main roll, some of these people, there was, I know, one ship full of prisoners was torpedoed, and quite a number of the men were killed there. If you see a reference here, you may see a person credited. That might have been an individual who's ventured a little bit of information. And by the way, that doesn't apply only to this role, it applies to the many other roles as well. So here we're looking at total number of prisoners of war listed, close to 660, in the late 658, something like that. So hopefully you'll find that information too of real value to you. Moving on now, we're going to go to I'm just picking up one of these embarkation roles at random. You'll see these are still a mix of red and blues in terms of colouring, and I need to go through and change that or make the colour a little bit more uniform as far as font goes. But very simple, really, just simply the surname, the Christian name. There's no aliases on this role, on the embarkation roles. Actually, I tell a lie. There are aliases here. There are second entries here shown, and also subsequent embarkations. But there is a little coding system that I have, which you'll see at the top of the page, and that denotes whether it was a subsequent embarkation, whether the what you're looking at is an alias or an alternative name, or possibly whether you're looking at both of those scenarios. And the color codes show that quite clearly. And at the bottom of the roll, so what we do is we tally up the grand total, and in this case this was a very little roll. It only had, I think, 108 entries on it. 2 of those were subsequent embarkations. That's all I have noted here. 2 of them were subsequent embarkations. And aliases as well, yep, or second entries. So that meant that as regards this particular embarkation, of the 108 that are listed here, for 106 of them, this was their very first embarkation overseas. So they appear for the first time on a nominal roll here, which is, in this case, the April 42 to June 42 nominal roll, or embarkation roll, as it is often referred to. So that said, we're going to move on to the next one. As I say, I wanted to just go through these fairly quickly. And this is the last of the rolls we'll have a quick squiz at before we go across and examine the details column of the second N.Z.E.F roll. The only main difference, well, obviously with the Maori battalion roll here, we've attempted to capture everybody. And again, we have duplicate entries here as well, and multiple embarkations. So we've tried to list as many aliases as possible. And we've retained those columns showing whether in Maori battalion and whether on the Maori battalion roll. And the same thing applies here as to what applies with the, and I think I mentioned this probably in video 1, under columns B and C that you see here, yes, if the person was in the Maori battalion, that is noted as with a yes. If they're on the Maori battalion roll, then we indicate which role, whether it's the main role, the J-Force role, or whether they serve with the 15th reinforcements. There's also a column here showing whether there's a few, there's not too many of these men who actually were members of A Company, which is the Northland Company that formed part of the Maori battalion. So that hopefully will provide some useful information for you. Obviously any information pertaining to these men when they were taken prisoner of war is shown here as well. I don't think there's much else that we need to go through. I have removed a couple of the columns. You won't find the cremations or ashes buried columns here, which both of those are on the main roll, and you won't see the funeral director column here. I think those are superfluous. If anybody wants to dig a little deeper, they can always go back to the main roll, and you will see here that many of the men who lie buried, yes, there are public cemeteries, but many of them too are in urupa throughout the whole of the northern area. And these urupa are maintained by Maori bodies. Actually, we'll just have a little bit more information here, so we can pick it up. Now, let's just see what I can see here. This is just actually an email that I got come through yesterday from a gentleman who was rather enthused with the work that I've been doing, and he just wanted to again draw my attention, I think, to the fact if I didn't make it too clear, perhaps in an earlier in an earlier video. He says here, what's some of your Urupa cemetery presentation last night? For your information, local councils only manage public cemeteries. They do not manage local Maori Urupas. Well, I did know that. I was aware of that. Most local Maori Urupa are private whanau or private hapu Urupas that are managed by the whanau or hapu representatives. And in some instances, only they know where they are. So this is interesting information, I think, pertaining to these men. Some of these private Ngāti Hine Urupas do hold second N.Z.E.F veterans that I can attest to. I have visited at least 15 Urupas, but there are many more salted around the Ngāti Hine Rohe that remain on my bucket list. What tells us is that there are many, many more Urupa which have second N.Z.E.F members in the north, your area of focus. Some have return services headstones which are easily recognisable, but others have other types of headstones with some or no reference to military service. So I think that's some great information. And he goes on to say too that only 4 of the Urupas that I visited are registered in either Billion Graves and Find a Grave websites. And there's quite a lot more information in that email as well, but I don't think it's relevant to this particular video that we're going through now. Yeah, all pretty straightforward, I think. There you've got the fellow, in the details column. It's basically a replication of what you're going to see anyway in the big roll, for the most part. And I don't think I need to dwell on that in any more depth. Now, with that said, I'm going to go across and look at this details column, which is really our final wrap-up of the second N.Z.E.F roll. And I just want to go through some of the entries here, and I will leave the other forces role and the familial role for my next video. And that will be really, if not the last, certainly the second to last of the videos in the near future. I may do a short video just filling in a few more things, and this would focus only on the website itself. We may just look at 1 or 2 of the submenus that we hadn't previously seen there before. Okay, so let me just make sure that's all going well. Yeah. So anyway, just looking at this column AF, which again, as I say, is the details column. If you look at that column, this is really a mop-up or a catch-all column. And so anything that you haven't seen on a row already in the preceding columns, you may find is picked up here. And I'm going to actually just possibly highlight 1 or 2 examples as I work through this, but you will see that there are really 3 situations where text has been highlighted in blue. One is where the soldier or nurse concerned has received either gallantry or service medals or possibly even civic awards post-World War II, in civil life. So that's one scenario. The other is where they've been a POW. And the third is where a fellow family member served. And by that I mean an immediate family member, such as a brother, a sister, a son, a daughter, a father, a mother, that type of scenario. So those are the 3 situations where you will see text in blue, and usually any information that you see in blue is right over to the left-hand side of that column. And in order of precedence, if you just taking a situation, if a person had all 3, for example, so say for example, a person here, I'm looking at one man, he's had the military medal, okay, but let's say he was a POW as well. You would see first of all the entry for military medal in blue, then you would see POW in blue, and then you would see if he had a family member, a brother of, it could be say John, Richard and Kenneth Chester Smith, who also serve, and the names of those 2 brothers would also be highlighted in blue. Now it will not always be a brother, of course, who may be the fellow member. As I said, could be a father, could be a mother, could be a wife, could be a husband. So very, very important that you understand that. Now, if the other family member is known to have served overseas, or not even overseas, is known to have served, with so the Navy or the Air Force, and then that fact has been mentioned. Okay, brother of so and so who served with the Royal New Zealand Air Force or with the Royal New Zealand Navy, so or with the Merchant Navy. So that would be shown here, and we'll talk, as I say, we'll be talking about the other roles, the other forces role in the next video. But if you simply just see brother of so-and-so who served and fell, then you can take it as a given that that person served with the 2nd N.Z.E.F. You may see sometimes a notation, brother of so-and-so who served with the New Zealand military forces. In other words, they served, but they didn't go overseas. And I use brother. I could be using anything. I could use wife, husband, sister, or whatever. So that's how you would see this. You'd start off with the award. You know, got one here I'm looking at, mentioned in dispatches, for example. And this person also had the MBE, member of the British Empire. So I've just put the military mention, they mentioned dispatches notation first, and then I put the civic award afterwards, and then we come on with the other information. Now, where we have a situation where a husband or wife, we have no evidence that they did serve at all, or same applies also for a father, then that would be shown in black. The font would be in black. It wouldn't be in blue, and it would be just in with the other information that you'll find in that column. But it usually follows on pretty closely after the information that is in blue. So I'm looking at one here. Let's just pull up a better one though. There's 2 or 3 here that I could cite, but we'll just pull up one here. Yeah, here's a good one because it covers all 3 scenarios. This gentleman's name was Frederick Baker. He was with the Maori Battalion, also known as Fred. Now, his rank, he ended up being a Lieutenant Colonel with the Maori Battalion, this gentleman. He received the Distinguished Service Order, DSO, and he was mentioned in dispatches, so you'll see MID there. He received the Efficiency Decoration, so you'll see the initials ED there, and he received the Coronation Medal. And he was a brother of Nelson Baker, again highlighted in blue, who also served. And then going on in black, we can read son of John Francis Frank and Jane Baker, née Robinson, husband of Edna Mavis Baker, née Carey, per the marriage index of Wellington. Now, just a word about the marriage index here. It's been easy and sometimes if we actually go back on this particular one to see if it's here. Yeah, this is a good case in point. If we look at the next of kin details on this roll, which is in column S, we see a person listed as Mrs. Ian Baker. Presumably it was the wife. They don't show actually here whether it was wife or mother, but Mrs. Ian Baker is shown as next of kin. So what I did is I undertook a search of the marriage index. And the reason I did this is this person was born in 1908, so there was a fair chance that he married before 1920, before 1940. So when I undertook that search, I found that there was an Edna Mavis Baker. Now remember, this woman's initials in the next of kin column were EM. So from that, I went and undertook a search of the marriage index. I'll talk a little bit about that when we come on to, not the next video, but the one after that. That takes a little bit of a look at the website again. And so we now find that this man was the husband of Edna Mavis Baker, née Carey, per the marriage index and at time of embarkation of Wellington. We also see that his place of birth was Kohukohu, which we may have got off the cenotaph, possibly, or some other source. and the DSO citation is on the cenotaph record. His place of death was Wellington, and there's also information to be found about him on one of the genealogical websites, which is gene.com. So there has been some very, very useful information that's come to hand from those genealogical websites, sites like ancestry.com, myheritage.com, familysearch.com, and so on. But of course, you cannot always rely on what you're seeing there. Well, you can't really totally rely on anything you see, unfortunately, in any of these records, because it was my experience over this last 14, 15 years that I've been going through all this stuff, that there have been a lot of errors made. So nothing is absolute. It can absolutely be guaranteed with 100% certainty, and that's not made my job any easier. But, you know, I've had to sort of take that common sense approach and steer that middle road to come to the conclusions that I have. And I'd say I've done that with about 95% accuracy. You'll never get it 100% right. So you're getting all sorts of sources. You know, as I said, there's the information coming off the Maori battalion because a family may have contributed information there. You're getting information off maybe Find a Grave, where sometimes you'll see a small biography there, and you'll see links going off also to other family members who are to be found on some of these genealogical sites. You're getting information off cemetery records, last known address, that type of thing. You may find that the only record if you look at the cemetery records, the only thing you may find there is the details of a cremation, but not a subsequent interment. So you may see the notation, you know, cremated at Hamilton Park Cemetery, Hamilton, but there's no other information known. Plot number is unknown, that type of thing. So lots and lots of information here. It really is a veritable wealth of information when you consider that all of this is just shown in so many, you know, in this number of rows, or in this number of columns across one single row. So very, very valuable information here. And as I say, often details of parents and that have been obtained from birth records, which I've spoken about, I think, in not the last video, but the one before that. So, so what's going to happen is, of course, there will gradually over time be a little bit more information added in here. Now, if you see any row here that is highlighted in yellow in this particular column, you can take it that the information there is correct all right, but the reason that I've highlighted it in yellow, that's just for my purposes, and it's because I want to return to that information to undertake a little bit more research. There's something that doesn't quite gel as I would like it, or I'd like to just dig a little deeper. But other than that, I think I've covered this pretty well, and we will talk a little bit more about, particularly about wives. So I want to talk a little bit about wives of some of these members, and particularly where they serve with other forces, because that throws up some interesting little anomalies at times too. But we'll deal with those when we look at the other forces role, where that situation is more prevalent, and we'll also relate that to the familial role when I deal with that tomorrow as well. So I hope I've covered this all fairly fully, and you've got all of the information that you need now as concerns the second N.Z.E.F role. A lot of very valuable information in here. So thank you again for coming along and having a look. I'll be back again in a day or two, and we will then really leap in and have a good solid look at the other forces role and the familial role, tying the two together, and indeed tying in also what we see on the second N.Z.E.F role with that as well. So with that said, thank you, and I will talk again soon with you. Thank you very much.